If you're new to the channel, make sure you guys click the subscribe button. There's gonna be more fire content on the way.
In my previous video about the gangs of Chicago, we looked at how the Black Disciples and Gangster Disciples evolved over the decades since they were started in the late 60s, all the way up to the mid-2000s, where we saw the leadership of each gang begin to crumble. We of course took a brief look at the 2004 crackdown on the Black Disciples that saw their then leader, Marvel Thompson, indicted and taken off the street along with 41 other senior BDs. And we of course looked at how the city of Chicago ended up demolishing several of the large tenement buildings that were actually drug-dealing strongholds for both the Black Disciples and Gangster Disciples over this period. The demolition of many of these gang-controlled blocks in Chicago left many younger members of both the GDs and BDs displaced, being forced to find new hoods and make new alliances
the Chicago one?
to continue getting money in the street together. So today, we're going to take a closer look at two of the most well-known BD and GD sets that emerged after the demolition of those Chicago projects. In fact, we're going to be taking a look at possibly the most well-known BD set in history, O-Block. But the O wasn't always O-Block. Long before King Von and Chief Keef immortalized O-Block forever in their lyrics, the BD-controlled Parkway Gardens blocks in Chicago used to go by the name Wick City, with Wick, W-I-C, standing for wild, insane, and crazy. But in this case, the Wick is stylized with 3 eyes, mainly due to the BD's affinity with the number 3. In fact, the story goes that many of the Black Disciples, based at Parkway Gardens,
there's a lot of Wick City members still around though.
BDs who had...
Cause you know how many niggas from Chicago claim Wick?
Yeah.
Yeah, they still active. Maybe smaller, but active.
Worked under Marvel Thompson in The Castle before the big bust in 2004. And if you didn't know, The Castle was actually a large drug-dealing operation ran by the BDs in Chicago, back when the gang was much larger and had a much clearer and organized leadership. But by the time we get to the 2010s, the BDs in Wick City were much less organized, and essentially just an emerging BD set made up of displaced youngers with ties to that original operation. But as I've said on numerous videos on gang culture before, a lot of the reasons that gangs emerged is
essentially, but
other groups.
Niggas was claiming more Wick before than it was O-Block. Like, you're not understanding what he's saying. Before O-Block was a thing, it was Wick. You fucking idiot.
One of these Gangster Disciple sets that is known to beef with Wick City are the St. Lawrence Boys, or STL, a crew that are based on 63rd and St. Lawrence Street. In fact, the location of this group is the exact reason why the likes of King Von are constantly dissing people from 63rd. And the STL GDs are also clicked up with another GD crew adjacent to them, known as EBT, who are located on 64th and South Eberhart Avenue.
Folks now shooting niggas in new assholes. Let niggas be known STL EBT right here, man. Shout out to the game, man. Ain't no other shit. Free guys, man. You already know, man.
Killer Bear.
Hey, what block I'm on, man? Man, you on EBT, man. This is right here, man. Gang, right here, man.
STL and EBT are right next to each other and are often referred to collectively as STL EBT, and that territory in turn is right next to Parkway Gardens or Wick City. For the purpose of this video, until a major event happens that causes an area to change its name, I'll continue referring to it as its name at the time. So as we begin this story, there are 2 main sides, the Wick City BDs and the STL EBT GDs. And if you think that's a lot of letters to remember, just think how many gang signs these guys have to learn. Now, it's hard to find one cataclysmic event that has caused the enormous wave of beef between these two groups. What seems to be the reality is that some of this beef dates all the way back to high school days, where members from these opposing areas would get into pretty basic schoolyard fights. However, these small, local schoolyard beefs would unfortunately escalate into deadly violence when those involved became old enough to get guns, likely facilitated by older BDs and GDs from their respective areas, pushing age-old feuds that probably date all the way back to the Marvel Thompson days of the BDs, or perhaps even earlier. But the thing is, one mustn't forget that in a lot of these stories, the people involved are basically children, teenagers, with many of them tragically having their lives taken before they're even old enough to buy a beer. And it's this fact that really makes the events that unfolded over just a few years even more tragic. And before we get into it, I just want to say, I know there's a lot of overlap between different gang sets in Chicago, so I just want to make it clear that for the purpose of this video, we're only focusing on a specific set of events that are significant to the early formation of Wick City, later becoming O-Block. Who knows, in future videos, I might branch out to other beefs involving other local gang sets that relate to O-Block like 600 or Lamron. But for the purpose of today's video, we're going to remain hyper-focused on Wick City and STL EBT, which will later become O-Block and Tookaville. And I know there's a lot of online schoolboy boards out there that claim to kind of keep track of many of the unverified supposed.
These niggas got an online scoreboard.
Reddit, or one of the many excellent YouTube channels that cover.
Do you know how many shootings that is for that to even happen?
A lot of unverified info about supposed crimes that may or may not have happened as part of this beef. I'm not just going to regurgitate that info to you. Instead, we're just going to focus on the facts of the pivotal moments that made this beef escalate, taking you through the journey of how these young BD and GD sets escalated a feud to all-out gang war, and ultimately how, as a result, their block became the most deadly in America. Now, Parkway Gardens, where the Wick City BDs are located, was eventually named Chicago and America's most dangerous block. And this is mainly the result of a staggering amount of shootings that took place there between 2011 and 2014. And this is actually the exact window of time that we are going to take a look at in this video. And I'd say that it's pretty clear that Parkway Gardens' reputation for being dangerous is the direct result of the events that unfolded as part of this feud. And in no small part, a result of the involvement of some of the very dangerous individuals that inhabited these blocks during this period of time. Some of the names from the Wick City BD enforcers of the 2010s may be very familiar to you, especially if you've listened to popular Chicago drill music in recent years. Of course, the most famous names of all at this point are Chief Keef and King Von. Chief Keef is famously from Parkway Gardens and reps O Block to the fullest, as well as fellow BD affiliates.
Shay, y'all think Sosa and Von got a song together or nah?
Probably, probably.
Chief Keef is famously from Parkway Gardens and reps O Block to the fullest, as well as fellow BD affiliated set 300, which Chief Keef has shouted out endlessly. However, when it comes to gang violence, as far as we know, Chief Keef has no bodies.
No,
he might have a reputation on the streets.
No, they do. They got a video in the studio
guns blast, but he doesn't claim to be a killer. Chief Keef always portrayed himself as more of a tough guy trapper, and ultimately the fact that he was able to focus more on the music than on the streets as his career developed might be the reason that he's still alive with us today. The same, of course, can't be said for King Von, a Parkway Gardens veteran who supposedly caught numerous bodies and didn't care who knew it. Of course, only recently half taken over the rap game, releasing what often felt more like confessions than actual songs. But all the way back in the early 2010s, King Von had been repping his BD affiliation on social media to the fullest, holding down the blocks of Parkway and showing love to his gang for the entire world to see.
Yeah, bitch.
Yeah.
Other big names in the Wick City BD set include feared supposed shooters like HK and J Money or J Munna. Then of course there's King Von's beloved BD bro T Roy, who is apparently a bit of a dynamic duo along with Von, with the close bond between these two becoming very relevant later in the story. And in fact, this is the exact reason why even right up until his death in 2020, King Von used to go by the name V-Roy on Twitter. And the fact that he comes from Wick City is why his Twitter handle still is @KingVon from the Wick. Basically, King Von and T-Roy loved their gang and they loved their block, holding it down with other Wick City members like Big A, OD, Trey 5, Platoon, Boss Money, Sherrod, Duke, who's actually been mentioned in numerous King Von lyrics, Rah Rah, aka Reezy, and Boss Top, who also became a rapper like Keef, even actually going on to drop a song called Wick City, and even later falling out with Chief Keef after apparently stealing clothes from him, leading DJ Academics in the War of Chirac era to affectionately dub him the Diaper Bandit. And look, I know by no means is this a completely extensive list of every member who has ever been affiliated with Wick City or O Block, and especially as of recently, names like Muwop and Gleesh have become more relevant. For the purpose of today's story, this isn't an O Block member lineup. It's just an initial introduction to the main events of the beef up until around 2014. But don't get it twisted, if we go into a future video covering further into this beef, I will of course introduce new names. But the names aren't really what's important, it's the sentiment. These were the Wick City BDs holding down their block and doing the most to fight their ops. The Wick City BDs were very well known for throwing up GDK hand signs repeatedly to show the world that they were GD killers who were very much indeed down to ride and kill.
GDK shit, man. Everybody got the voice in their hand, man. GDK, broke boys.
So, who were the GD boys that these guys wanted to K so badly? Well, over on the STL EBT side, they were up against a few names who you might know if you're well versed in Chicago drill culture. The first to come to mind is Jakira Barnes, also known as Key or KI. A young
I heard she was a serial killer.
Friends with fellow
Bro,
members
she was a fucking
Another
menace.
member was FBG Butter, who along with KI were also known as a bit of a dynamic duo dubbed the Twins. Other members actually went by FBG or Flyboy Gang, an STL EB clique more focused on making making music, which included other names like FBG Brick, and of course the legendary FBG Duck. Another musically inclined member who repped FBG was Lil J, who lived in STL and would later become more clicked up with them, but mainly had beef with 600 that kind of ran adjacent to this feud. They had Lil B and Wooski, who had actually been dubbed King of the Ops. There was Boss Trell and Lil Doc. Once again, there might be some names from STL EBT, especially the later years, who haven't been included here, but these are the prominent members of both sides who played a prominent role during this period. So now you know the background and the people involved, let's take a closer look at the actual storyline, so we can get a better understanding of how events unfolded, causing Wick City to become O Block and STL EBT to become Tookaville. As I mentioned at the start of this video, the true origins of this beef are pretty hard to trace. It would seem pretty unrealistic to try and trace things back to their exact origins in the schoolyard scraps between the BD and GD members from each of these blocks. But we certainly can trace the true bloodshed between these groups back to one pivotal moment, and that's the killing of Edric Tyshon Walker, also known as Ty, a BD who was gunned down in May 2009, being just 17 years old. Ty was shot multiple times just before 10 PM on the 6500 block of South Evans Avenue, with 3 suspects from EBT being charged with his murder. Now, Ty was actually closer aligned with another BD set called 065 Young Money, but following his death, local friends of his formed the group TYMB, or Ty You're My Brother. This was to both keep him alive and also a pledge to avenge him, a move that would become a little bit of a trend as this beef continues. Anywho, the loss of Ty was only the beginning of bloodshed in the area, mainly caused by STL EBT members, and it would actually be the next killing after Ty.
You can't claim OTF and then say you're neutral.
I'm not from niggas know I'm
OTF. The person in question was Reezy, or older OG member of Wick City, who was gunned down.
That's literally what you just said.
Bro, shut up, bro. I'm watching this video, bro.
Reezy, aka Rah-Rah, real name Laverick Marshall, was an older OG member of Wick City. And on August the 25th, 2010, Reezy was found shot in the back after the police broke up an enormous fight near 64th Street and South King Drive. Reezy was later pronounced dead at the hospital. Now, there's been a lot of speculation over who committed this crime, but nothing conclusive has ever been proven. But regardless, only a month later, another brutal slaying went down that appeared to be related. This time with an STL EBT member's relative being taken out on their turf. Apparently in this case, a blood relative of STL member FBG Kells, the retaliatory victim was Jeremy Marshall, also known on the street as Lil 4. Not to be confused with a different Lil 4 who died in 2013. Jeremy was approached near 63rd and Rhodes Avenue by 2 people, with one pulling out a gun and beginning to shoot. He was shot in the back and tried to run before collapsing, but unfortunately didn't make it, and the shooters fled the scene in a vehicle. Once again, it was unclear exactly who committed this crime, but intense speculation has suggested that it was somebody from the Wick City BDs, with many going as far to draw a link between the fact that OD Perry from Wick City was gaining a reputation for being a shooter around this time. Now, this can't strictly be proven, but it's likely that there were retaliations between Wick City and STL EBT in the months that followed. And this would lead us to January 2011, where we're introduced to an all too familiar name in Chicago drill, Tuca. On the 12th of January 2011, 15-year-old Shondale Gregory, known on the streets as Tuca, was waiting at a bus stop at the 600 block on East 63rd Street. At a certain point,
why does everybody hate him? What did he do? Can we get a backstory on him? Like, we all know he died on Tuca. We all know he died at the bus stop, but why did the ops hate him so much? Was he a shooter? Did he do a drill? Like,
I mean, maybe they just, I mean, they knew that like everyone like loved him, so like that's why.
The vehicle pops up and somebody hops out wearing a half mask. Some have said that this person exchanged a few words with Tuca, but ultimately within seconds they had shot Tuca multiple times and fled the scene. STL member FBG Duck was actually close friends with Tuca, saying that after hearing about his death, he actually ran to the scene of the crime, where in a tragic moment, he even got to see his slain brother before he was taken away.
Me and him clicked, like that was one of my real close friends. Like every day, like spend the night at his house, he spend the night at mine. And my cousin came in there running to me crying and shit, telling me, your friend just got killed. You feel me? Then I ran all the way from 62nd and Wabash all the way to 63rd to St. Lawrence. Saved them right there on the floor. You know how that shit go, broke right down.
Tuca had unfortunately passed away on the scene before paramedics had arrived, and it's not entirely clear who was responsible for the death of Tuca. As previously discussed, TYMB members were hell-bent on avenging their friend Ty by taking out an STL EBT member. Meanwhile, Wick City members wanted revenge for what had happened to Reezy. But regardless, ultimately Tuca paid his price for his STL EBT affiliation. In response to this tragic loss, STL EBT would rename their hood Tookaville in his honor and as a commitment for revenge. And members like FBG Brick would rep Tuca's memory to the fullest.
Do you represent Tookaville?
Oh, to the fullest. That's what I do it for. That's what it's always been about since day one.
Question.
Tuca, like, my homie was 15 years old when he got killed. Never hurt nobody.
You said D-Rose killed Tuca?
Meanwhile, it's actually been said that it was in response to this that members from TYMB and Wick City clicked up to form an alliance in anticipation of some kind of retaliation. And in the face of an intense desire from Tookaville to avenge their fallen brother, soon emerged an intense desire to disrespect Tuca from the BD side. As you may well know, Tuca's name has been endlessly dragged in hip-hop over the years. Now, I'm not going to get into every instance or drama over this happening, but story goes initially the GDs from Tookaville, people like FBG Duck, were apparently saying that they were smoking Tuca out of respect for him, a nod to the old story that Tupac's crew, the Outlaws, smoked his ashes in a blunt after he died. But the BD ops from Wick City immediately decided to flip this and start making fun of Tookaville. The most immediate and iconic diss, of course, was Chief Keef's song 300, where he says "fuck Tuca gang." And from here, other members continued to disrespect.
Tuca, what I'm smoking on, shut down. Oh, my bitch, do I see your brain? Right up for your block, bitch,
But beyond simple shit talking on social media, behind the scenes, a demon was lurking in the shadows. Because as we mentioned briefly earlier, one of Tuca's closest friends growing up was a young girl named K.I. But you might know her better as the young girl who became a teenage assassin, supposedly racking up 17 bodies by 17. Story goes it was the death of Tuca that actually turned K.I. into a cold-blooded killer. Apparently coached in shooting by her cousin, fellow Tookaville GD boss Trell, and maneuvering in the streets by her older brother Seaball, a bloodthirsty teenage K.I. would soon become a bona fide hitter for the Tookaville GDs. Hellbent on getting revenge for Tuca, K.I. would eventually find it in the form of OD. At around 11:35 p.m. on August the 10th, 2011, 20-year-old O.D. Perry, respected Wick City member, was shot and killed near Parkway Gardens on 400 block of East 64th Street. O.D. suffered multiple gunshot wounds, including one to the neck, and was pronounced dead at Stroger Hospital within an hour of the shooting. Just like Tuca, in his memory, the Wick City B-Deans renamed Parkway Gardens O-Block, in his memory, committing to avenge him. Of course, the likes of Chief Keef and King Von immortalized O-Block, as it is now known today, in their music forever. The killing of O.D. Perry was supposedly revenge for the killing of Tuca, with this apparently being exemplified by the fact that it went down on Tuca's very birthday. OD's killers were never apprehended, but from here, rumors begun to swirl that this was actually on Tuca's birthday of teenage Tookaville assassin K.I. And one of the people pushing these rumors was, of course, Lil J, who had apparently shared the following image along with a caption saying "shout out to them twins that made O-Block," referring to FBG Butter and K.I. However, for the record, no one has been convicted of this crime, and there was never any proof tying K.I. or Butter to the killing of O.D. Perry. Well, actually, many years later, a Freedom of Information request did reveal that the cops did officially name K.I. and Boss Trell as subjects on the report. This came after an unnamed informant named them as the shooters in 2016, years after they had passed. But let's just assume for 1 second, based on the reputation that K.I. has when she passed, that a 14-year-old girl from Tookaville really did go out on her first trip to the op block and claim the life of a respected Wick City older. It kind of makes sense with the narrative. People from Tookaville couldn't believe she'd done this at such a young age. Combine that with the fact that K.I. was supposedly heartbroken over Tuca's death and was desperate to avenge him. The fact that she had done so at such a young age, getting her the respect of the entire gang, leads me to believe that it's absolutely no surprise that from this point she would go on to build a feared reputation as a complete demon of a shooter for Tookaville, quickly becoming a feared figure in the entire Chicago gang scene. And the suspicion that she was indeed involved in the O.D. Perry incident were only fueled further by tweets that she would release dissing O.D., not dissimilar to the way that the guys over on O-Block had spoken about Tuca in the past. In fact, there's one detail from this story that is so crazy it's like something straight out of a Hollywood movie. It's actually rumored that there was a huge 357 or 44 Magnum that O.D. Perry was known for flexing. Story goes he had this on him when he was taken out, with K.I. apparently taking the gun away from his body after the hit. A rumor based on the fact that she seemed to flex a near identical gun in the years that followed, seemingly as a trophy on social media. Whether or not this is exactly how this situation went down, we'll probably never know for sure. But at least just for her alleged involvement in the hit that made O-Block O-Block, K.I. got a big reputation in Tookaville and would begin to make moves in numerous beefs that stretched far beyond just O-Block. In some ways, it seemed like she got addicted to shooting and killing, but a lot of her story isn't really relevant to this feud, so some of those details are definitely for another day. But what we do know for sure is that what followed the killing of O.D. Perry was a bloodbath of tit-for-tat violence between O-Block and Tookaville that would last nearly 2 years. On the 19th of October 2011, Edward Riley, also known as Platoon, from O Block was walking with his girlfriend on 63rd and King Drive, at which point 2 suspects approached and gunned him down, only 1 block south on 64th, closer to O Block. And from here, the suspects went even further down the block, shooting a 15-year-old in the head who miraculously survived. Platoon unfortunately wasn't so lucky and didn't make it, and in his memory, at least for a brief period, people began to call the area Toontown, though ultimately the name O Block was retained. Once again, there's been intense speculation over exactly what went down or who was responsible for the hit on Platoon, as apparently in addition to Tookaville, a GD set called MOB also had a motive to take out Platoon as part of a different feud that he was involved in via 600, who were also BDs affiliated with O Block. It's actually been suggested that there were 2 assailants there that day, with one being Lil B from Tookaville and the other allegedly being Beans from MOB. It's also been said by many that Wooski from Tookaville was involved in this. And I'll be honest, when I started this video, I said to myself, I don't want to be accusing people of killings that they haven't been convicted for, especially if they're still alive. But hell, I googled who killed Platoon, and even Google featured snippets of snitching on Wooski. I couldn't believe that. Many people over on Archivology on Reddit have suggested in the past that Wooski had something to do with this, with others writing it off as complete internet cap, mainly due to his young age at the time. All we know is that right now no one has been convicted of the slaying of Platoon, and the really sad thing is that after the loss of such a beloved O Block member, it wouldn't take them long to lose yet another.
Damn.
At 6:47 p.m. on February the 12th, 2012, Sherrod Liggins of O Block was discovered with a gunshot wound to the head at 6400 block of South King Drive, just outside Parkway Gardens once again. You're starting to see why they call it the most dangerous block in America now, right? Sherrod remained in hospital fighting for his life for around 4 days, until February the 20th, when he was unfortunately pronounced dead at Stroger Hospital. No one was ever caught for this crime. However, KI has suggested pretty heavily on Twitter that Boss Trail from Tookaville was the one responsible, with some of the internet detectives over on Chiracology digging deeper into these tweets and suggesting that when this shooting went down, Boss Trail had actually shot Sherrod from all the way across the street. Impeccable aim, apparently the result of his use of a gun with a red laser beam sight on it to improve his accuracy. That gun itself apparently even featured in the Lil J FBG Duck music video for the song Critical, a Chief Keef diss that actually dropped months after this happened. Combine this with the fact that Boss Trail himself seemed to be bragging about the incident on Twitter later in the year, with KI also tweeting references to that red beam. A frankly brazen attack, which naturally only beget more bloodshed between O Block and Tookaville in the months that followed. On the 28th of April, 2012, around 9:30 p.m., Marlon Monroe, also known as Lil Doc from Tookaville, had left a painting job and was walking towards a convenience store of the 6300 block of St. Lawrence Avenue, at which point a gunman passed by and sprayed the scene with bullets. Marlon apparently stumbled away from the scenes injured and collapsed into a tall patch of weeds in an empty lot next to the store. Even more shocking than that is the fact that when the police later came to the scene, they didn't even find Marlon's body, collecting up the shells and evidence and then leaving, with a 16-year-old boy actually discovering Marlon hours later in the weeds with a gunshot wound to his chest. Marlon had apparently been left there for over an hour after being shot, and within an hour of being discovered, he was pronounced dead at Stroger Hospital. Once again, it's unclear exactly who was responsible for this crime, but the next high-profile shooting between O Block and Tookaville features a very familiar face indeed.
An hour and nobody noticed?
On October the 13th, 2012, a 17-year-old boy named Modell McCambry was walking along the street with his cousin on the way to meet a girl. This went down on the 6300 block of South Rhodes Avenue. At around 9:30 p.m, somebody walked up and opened fire, hitting Modell in the chest. He too later died in Stroger Hospital. And what makes this story and the previous one so much more tragic is apparently Modell and Doc were actually related with a shared grandmother, who had apparently received the news of both of their deaths within months. But who was responsible, you ask? Well, many have suggested that it was actually O Block future rap superstar King Von, mainly due to the fact that he himself had made numerous tweets to Tookaville op Wooski, where Von seems to hint at him or at least his crew being responsible for Modell's death. In fact, Von was actually rumoured to have been present for numerous shootings carried out by the O Block during this period of time, which naturally built him up a feared reputation as a member who was always down to do some dirt. He himself even famously bragged in his songs to have a total of 7 bodies under his belt. But regardless of how true that is, from here the O Block shooters continued getting busy, attempting time and time again to claim bodies from Tookaville. On October the 30th, 2012, a man named Derek Johnson, also known on the streets as P5 or Crack, was gunned down. Now, he wasn't actually Tookaville, but a member of Jarrow City, a Chicago gang set north of Tookaville with a long history dating to back before this feud even began. But apparently, P5 was out walking on Tookaville turf, specifically the 6200 block of South Eberhart Avenue, where apparently J Money, King Von and Big A of O Block were lurking in the area looking for Tookaville ops to attack. In fact, only a day before this incident went down, King Von himself had tweeted that he was out trying to catch more bodies so that he could catch up with fellow O Block shooter T-Roy. So story goes...
What'd he say? What did he say?
In fact, only a day before this incident went down, King Von himself had tweeted that he was out...
I ain't been hanging with T-Roy like that because he been winning. I gotta catch up first. Give me to Friday.
Niggas is in a race for bodies. Nah, they got it. You think everything is a video game?
Trying to catch more bodies so that he could catch up with fellow O Block shooter T-Roy. So story goes that when these O Block shooters...
They could put LOL after the message.
P5 around 9:30 in the morning, opening fire and hitting him multiple times. Some have even gone as far as to suggest that he was actually hit 6 times in the head and 9 times in the body. P5 was taken to Stroger Hospital, but once again pronounced dead within the hour. And from here, the wanton violence between O Block and Tookaville was far from over, as the O Block side would continue to seek retribution for the attacks that had been done on them, and so soon after the P5 incident, O Block would appear to claim a high-profile member of Tookaville. 17-year-old Rodney Stewart, aka Boss Trell, aka the red beam slinging marksman who'd allegedly killed Sherrod from way across the street for Tookaville, was apparently planning to flee town, tweeting about being excited for a fresh start on the 6th of November, even purchasing a bus ticket with the intention of leaving town on the 10th. But unfortunately, only 2 days before his scheduled departure, on the 8th of November, Boss Trell was found face down in an alley in the
Oh my god, right before the nigga was trying to get out, bro. Why would you even tweet that? I don't even let niggas know my move, nigga. Once I'm out, I'm out.
Staying in the crib until further notice.
3rd Street. He'd been shot in the back of the head. Now, in case you couldn't tell, the location of this shooting is a long way from O Block and Tookaville, and it's actually been suggested by some that J Money and T-Roy were actually responsible for coordinating a setup of Boss Trell via an allegedly disloyal ex-girlfriend, apparently luring him well away from Tookaville with the promise of meeting a girl, but when he arrived, BT was shot in the head and left for dead. His grandmother said the identity of the shooter is not a secret, but no witnesses were willing to step up. He didn't actually pass away immediately and apparently was left fighting for his life brain dead in the hospital for several days. This was followed by T-Roy of O Block, who is widely believed to have been responsible for this incident, mockingly tweeting on the 8th of November, "No, Trell, stay alive." Meanwhile, Tookaville affiliates like FBG Cash were paying their respects to Boss Trell, but ultimately he passed away later that day. The death of Boss Trell is said to have had a huge effect on remaining Tookaville members, especially KI. After his death, Cash Out made a song in tribute called Dear Boss Trell, which seemed to hint that his past as a red beam slinging shooter was legit, even going as far as to dub him the real-life Max Payne. Meanwhile, of course, over on O Block, they were celebrating for having gotten retribution for their fallen brother Sherrod, but Boss Trell was of course a devastating loss for Tookaville, and he would soon be avenged in spectacular fashion.
Funny. He got backed by a bitch too.
2013, Jerome Wood, also known as J Money, from O Block, was allegedly set up. Ironically, in a way not dissimilar to how Boss Trell had been set up, with J Money apparently visiting a location on the 6600 block of South Rhodes Avenue around 2 p.m. Allegedly set up by a girl on the ops turf, legend has it that J Money was expecting to see a woman he knew, but arrived to the location to be greeted by Lil B and KI from Tookaville. He apparently attempted to flee down a gangway into an adjacent property, but he was unfortunately shot in the head, collapsing outdoors and not making it. Tweets from other gang members have suggested that this incident was direct retaliation for P5, as well as Boss Trell, and KI actually tweeted after this incident about shooting people in the back of the head, tweets which many people thought suggested direct involvement by KI, referring to this exact incident. Funnily enough, within only a year, the other Tookaville member Lil B, who had supposedly been there that day for the J Money hit, was killed by the Chicago PD on March the 28th, 2014. With this going down after apparently being chased by cops who'd seen a suspected drug dealer, with the cops claiming that he hopped over a fence and then pointed a pistol at them, leading them to tase Lil B and shoot him multiple times, leaving him dead. After Lil B's passing, Platoon's cousin actually came out to say they found the guys who killed his little cousin. One was charged with an unrelated murder, referring to that other MOB member who was allegedly involved, and the other was killed by the cops, referring to Lil B, with many taking this as confirmation that it was indeed Lil B who was involved in the Platoon hit. From here, Tookaville and O Block would continue to wage war back and forth in the years that followed. However, the dynamics would change going forward. Obviously, as you may already know, King Von was taken off the streets for around 3.5 years after being picked up for the murder of another Tookaville affiliate, Malcolm Stuckey, a murder rap which he later beat and I have covered extensively on the channel. Meanwhile, whilst this story was going on, K.I., after the death of another young friend of hers, Taekwon, would form Taekwon World, another outlet for her bloodthirsty desire for revenge, with K.I. getting into numerous street feuds well beyond O-Block, fighting ops from numerous different parts of the city, with her past eventually catching up to her. But most notably, the beloved hitter of O-Block, T-Roy, would eventually be slain, leaving the remaining members of O-Block to form a Get Back Gang in order to get revenge. Get Back Gang were a ruthless squad of O-Block shooters, hellbent on getting revenge on Tookaville and other groups that had a role in their star hit T-Roy being taken from them. If you want to see me cover these stories in the later generations of this beef in a future video, leave a comment below and let me know what you'd like me to cover. But for now, I just hope that you've enjoyed that video and learnt a lot from today's analysis of the origins of the O-Block.
I'm not gonna lie though, it looks like the clique is getting smaller and smaller though, because I ain't gonna lie, you can name the damn whole roster now. I ain't gonna lie though, I can't even name.
All their friends are dying.
Nigga, I can't even name the roster on the other side, bro. I ain't gonna say I'm gonna hold you, bro. If you ask me to name the roster of Tookaville, nigga, I can't even name you, bro. That's the one I know. Ruga,
yeah.
That's two. That's it. As far as being alive go.
Yeah. If you did, make sure you hit that subscribe button and hit that bell so that you see every single time that I upload. If you found it useful, make sure that you give this video a like too. Thank you so much for watching.
These videos are mad interesting, but they make me so tired.
The New York one.